Hello and welcome to Jason McLean Questions Everything Live. I know you may be saying, but aren't you always live? Not anymore. We've got a new channel going up. Jason McLean Questions Everything. Link is in the description below. Donny and I are going to be putting up some, and the occasional Rob, when he's available, we're going to be putting up standalone pre-recorded videos. Live stream staying on, but it's going to be Jason McLean Questions Everything live, where you can hop in. So when this is over, follow the link, like, follow, subscribe, and you'll start getting that material over there. It's going to be a great time. Great time is had by all, hopefully. Speaking of all, let me bring up the usual cohorts: Bigfoot Michigan Rob and the infamous Donny Cho. But we're not alone today, are we?
Never alone, Jason. You never walk alone.
No, because this week we have Dr. Dean Bertram from Untold Radio.
Greetings. It's great to be here with you all.
You've this is what, your second or third time on the show?
Second or third. We need a few more people, so it's more like the Brady Bunch. We're almost there. Look at all those windows.
Yeah, you know. Well, what is it? It's 9. 3 in the top, 3 in the middle. Oh, then no, there's 10 because you have the middle square.
Well, no, it's 9. Yeah, it
the
was
middle
9
square. Yes, the middle square is
was
the
Alice.
fifth one over.
Alice,
Correct.
yeah.
Yes.
Just don't have me in the middle square. I just don't want to.
Back when I was a little kid, I remember this dude named Paul Lynn. You guys remember him? It's maybe. He was funny. It was pretty funny.
Huh.
It gives away my age just a little bit.
Mm-hmm. The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Who was he?
You people are disgusting.
Was he on the Brady
That was
Bunch?
his tagline.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know.
So I guess those who have a little more mileage on their tires should have to
Well, I was
type in
3.
and tell us who that was.
I was 3 years old.
Sure you were, Rob.
Times 2.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of time quickly, I just still remember the Waltons. And what terrifies me when I think about it is today, when the Waltons was made and was this kind of, sentimental show about the Depression, the Waltons was closer to the Depression than we are now to the Waltons. That is nuts.
Geez.
It's nuts to think of, because I grew up watching the Waltons. And the Depression when I was a little kid seemed like a long time before.
Yep.
Now, if I remember correctly, Dr. Dean, that's when at the end of the show they said, "Good night, John Boy."
Yeah.
Good night, Mary Ellen. Good night, Lance, Becky, Toto. Okay.
Yeah.
John Boy. Yeah.
John. Yes. Right. Okay.
Jim Bob, Mary Ellen,
Yeah.
Aaron. Who else was there? Elizabeth. I still watch it. We have it here. My daughter loves it. I raised my daughter on the Waltons because it's good, wholesome, home-style values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Someone pointed out that if, like, to your point, when Marty McFly went back to 1955 originally, like, it would be 1993 today if that movie was made today. I'm
Crazy.
like, nope, I don't want to hear that. Shut your mouth.
Crazy.
Shut your mouth.
Ooh,
Yeah. It hurts, don't it, Donny?
that one kind of hurts.
Yeah, it does. Uh-huh. A lot of, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, when you turn to the oldies station and they're playing Nirvana, you're like, what was the other one? Oh, geez.
Smashing Pumpkins. That's another thing. The Smashing
Yeah,
Pumpkins song about 1979.
Yeah.
That song was made closer to 1979 than we are now to the song 1979 being made by the Smashing Pumpkins. It's
Exactly.
nuts.
Yeah, we're getting old. I blame Rob personally.
I get blamed for everything, which is fine though. I enjoy it. I roll with it. I love it.
I know you do.
I simply love it. I'm typing too, Jason, but yeah, I'm multitasking. But yeah,
The good news is,
I embrace it. That's what I was trying to say.
while I'm here, Rob is the one who's getting the beating. Normally, when I'm on Mysterious Library on Tuesday nights with Jason on the Untold Radio Network, I'm the one who gets all the beating. So you've become the whipping boy. You've taken the load off me tonight.
Yeah,
Rob.
it's just a role you fill. When we do 6 shows a week, you got to alternate roles. And speaking of 6 shows a week, I think this is a perfect segue.
It is. Look at you. professional
yeah,
broadcaster you.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. All channels, all shows are streamed on Texas Front Porch and Bigfoot Missing Rob, and some other changes are in the works moving forward. Enough of that later. Mondays is Texas Front Porch, 9 o'clock in the East. Tuesday is Van Buren Variety, 8 o'clock in the East. Beyond BMR on Tuesdays as well, 9 o'clock in the East. Jason McLean does a little ditty along with the good Dr. Dean. It's called Mysterious Library on Until Radio AM. You can catch them at 10 o'clock in the East on Doug Heidschek's affiliates. Wednesday is Jason McLean Questions Everything, 9 o'clock in the East. Thursday, right back with me, Brunch with Bigfoot Michigan Rob, 1 o'clock in the East. That night at 9 in the East, the Blondes, the Booze, the Paranormal Podcast. Go check out the girls, 9 o'clock Thursdays. If you need a little more woo with the Booze, they do it again on Friday at 9 in the East. Saturday, Infamous Minds, True Crime, Serial Killers. If that's your bag, go check out Tex and Danielle Diva. That is 3 in the East on Saturdays. And other than that, Jessica Jones, Saturday night at 10. And, of course, Miss Diva at 11 as well. That's on Spaced Out Radio. Thank you to Texas Front Porch for that.
Tex would like to let everyone know that it's good that we all know our places.
Yeah, well.
It's true.
Yeah, we do. Thank you for that, Tex.
Yeah.
Thank you for the tremendous super chat, by the way, Tex.
Yes, exactly. So let's go ahead and kick this shindig off with a little bit of some table placing, shall we, with Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar has been around since the 80s, mid to early 80s. And his main claim I imagine most everyone knows what's going on, but just so everyone's on the same page here. He claimed to be a whistleblower. He was actually the one who sort of revealed Area 51 to the world. And he was telling people, hey, if you go to this location at this time, you'll be able to see the reverse engineered UFOs from Area 51 being flown. And people went and they saw them. And so his claim is that he worked as an engineer at Area 51, reverse engineering down to UFOs and UFOs that had crashed and other exotic materials. That's his claim to fame. Now, the question I have that is predicating the show, and really Bob Lazar is just in many ways is a venue into the broader idea of the government whistleblower. How is it that he's still among the living and has not suffered an odd fate, such as the infamous Senor Epstein, considering when he came out in the 80s, it would have been a lot easier to do that. It would have been a lot easier for them to pull that off and make that happen. And so I couldn't have imagined anyone better than Dr. Dean Bertram to answer this question. Dean, could you, aside from your show Talking Weird on Saturday nights, and of course our show on Tuesday nights, could you let everyone know what your doctorate is in? And then I'd like to hear you talk about Bob Lazar a little bit.
Sure. I did a PhD in the history department of the University of Sydney back in the day. And my dissertation, which explains really what it was about, was titled Flying Saucer Culture, an Historical Survey of American UFO Belief. So I looked at the development of UFO belief and I tried to place it within various historical strains and within a cultural context and along also with the influence of certain individuals, including Lazar and other people like that, whose stories went a long way to forming or help form the type of UFO belief that we all operate within today. Or, when we think about ufology, we understand those key tenets of Roswell crashes and back-engineered sources in Area 51 and all of those type of ideas, which became really front and center in that type of period you were mentioning before. From the late 70s, early 80s, with the revelations by Will Moore and the psychological messing with Paul Benowitz by the AFOSI, and then that story fed into a lot of the type of ideas of US government I suppose, allegiances with the aliens and secret underground bases, and that being tied in with cattle mutilations. And Will Moore, who was involved in whistleblowing that story, supposedly, or being the investigative journalist on point, was also the first guy who wrote the initial Roswell book in 79. I don't think it came out to maybe 80. Certainly nobody in ufology remembered Roswell. Roswell was a story in 1947, and nobody talked about it until the late 70s. When people got involved, we know were intelligence assets like William Moore, who not only was a journalist writing the space, but he confessed at the MUFON symposium in 1989 that he was an AFOSI asset and was operating under Richard Doty, who's a well-known AFOSI agent who also manipulated Linda Moulton Howe and also manipulated Paul Benowitz and injected much of this type of dialogue into the discussion, the idea that there are UFO secrets above and beyond just the older. There was always the idea that the government knew something, but not to the level of X-Files paranoia that we get coming out of stories from William Moore and from Richard Doty and people like that. And then that, of course, all kind of metastasizes into the MJ-12 documents, which again, William Moore's the point man on, along with his friend TV producer Jamie Shandera, who just happens to get the roll of film of the MJ-12 documents show up in their mailbox, who just happens to be an asset of Richard Doty, the FOSI agent, who just happened to have shown something very similar to Linda Moulton Howe, a number of years earlier. So you can see that strain of belief coming from there. But to jump forward to Bob Lazar, who starts becoming quite public through interviews with George Knapp in Las Vegas, and then it goes worldwide in the late 1980s. Knapp introduces, I suppose, Lazar via Knapp introduces the next kind of big part of, or big piece of the supposed puzzle, and that's that these sources, which although Lazar never says, I don't think he ever says they were what was retrieved in Roswell. I can't even remember now, but it's the idea that they have retrieved sources and they're fooling around with them in Area 51 and they're doing test flights out of Area 51. So then Area 51 becomes a piece of that puzzle, which everybody now who's into UFO belief tends to put all of this together into this big, kind of meta narrative. But you can see the different pieces drop in at different times, and certainly Lazar's the front man, where whatever the reality of Lazar being a genuine whistleblower or a disinformation agent or just a BS artist, depending what different people's perspectives are, it's certainly Lazar who really introduces that via George Knapp into the type of ufological consciousness.
Oh, hold on.
Oh,
Thank you, Tex. Tex would like your take on the Aurora crash in 1897, but we will save that for later in the show. Definitely we'll hit that in the second hour, if not earlier than that. But just wanted to get that on there. So let's take sorry, Rob, I'm going to step on your role here because I do want to take
just continue on. No, this is fine. I'm just listening.
I do want to kind of take a step back, because one of the things you pointed out is a lot of this is happening in the early to mid 80s with Lazar.
Well, I think Lazar goes public in 89, right? I think he's talking to people like John Lear and other people and taking.
I remember seeing him in a documentary on like 2020 or something, and that was like 1989.
Yeah, that's when he starts doing interviews with George Knapp, as far as I recall. I think it's 89.
Okay. Sorry,
he was already I think before that, and it mightn't have been years before, it might have just been in a 6-month lead up, but before that he was taking people out to, I think then it was the Black Mailbox was the place you would go to. Yeah. Steve Medlin, the rancher's mailbox, which by the time I was there was then painted white. It was then the white mailbox because he got sick of people stealing it or graffitiing it or spitting on it or whatever. But I think that was the type of space Lazar was taking people to see Old Faithful do its test flights every night. And then he did the interviews, which went worldwide, really.
So the something that I want to make certain everyone got is this is during the time frame when Richard Doty is, and for those who haven't seen it, you can go watch it for free on Tubi after the show. Watch Mirage Men. It's a very well done documentary about Richard Doty and what he was doing in the late 70s through the 80s and into the 90s, and with OSI. But this is when he starts driving a lot of this with Linda Moulton Howe, who, again, I always want to give her the benefit of the doubt. I think she's probably legitimate, but she was being manipulated.
Oh, she was definitely being manipulated. Yeah, I think she was totally sincere. I think that was part of a problem, was she wanted to believe too much, you know.
And also, too, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't and Dean, Jason, you probably don't, probably Donnie, wasn't Christopher Mellon, wasn't he a senior defense officer for the government that was also at a blog, a whistleblower blog on all this as well?
Yeah, I think the Mellon stuff's a little more recent, but yeah, he was. There's been so many of them, you know what I mean? Now
Right.
you get all these people, and this is again, I think, which we'll get to this point of why are these people to run and say whatever they want to, unless these are controlled releases of either disinformation, total misinformation, or real information. I can't believe any of this stuff, whichever comes out, isn't for the most part intentionally channeled out into the public sphere. So I think Mellon stuff could very well have been intentionally channeled as well. Obviously, this is just my suspicion. I have no way of proving any of it.
Sure.
I'm not, although some of these people admit it. You know, people like William Moore were like, yeah, we were feeding disinformation to people and watching people in the UFO community and playing all kinds of games. So we know what happens, and we know some people have admitted to it. Richard Doty's admitted to much of it as well. But there are people, of course, like, you know, Luizondo hasn't said that he's doing it as some intentional leak. Bob Lazar hasn't said that he was doing it as an intentional leak. So you get the people who still try to maintain as genuine whistleblowers, and then you get the people who go, well, this was all a manipulation. The question is it all maybe just a manipulation, is what, you know, I always tend to lean towards.
You know, and we do hear about people in conspiracy theories that they vanished or eliminated, some well known that have maybe been assassinated. My question is this: with Bob Lazar, Christopher Mellon, the others that you've mentioned earlier, do you think that the reason they're still, because again, the premise of the show is, you know, how come they're not Epstein'd, right? Epstein'd. Do you think that a lot of these people are still with us and they're amongst the living, for lack of a better term, is because if they were to disappear, then it would open up that they were really on to something, and it's something that the government does not want the public to know about?
I mean, I think we have to consider that. We have to consider maybe Lazar had some kind of dead man switch in place where more information would get released if he was topped or something, right? And I think he says he came out as, and at first he was doing interviews as Dennis, remember, and he was in kind of shadow when they were doing interviews with him. But I think one of his points was he came out kind of as an insurance policy. But so that, to your point, Rob, that could absolutely be the case. My suspicion is, though, that somebody who works in a top secret, you know, environment like that and is taking friends out to watch secret testing on the borderland of, you know, S4 and Area 51, that they would have got a whiff of it pretty early on and stopped it pretty early on, is my suspicion.
But what's your take on all this Bob Lazar? Because, you know, there's not a governmental record on him that even worked there. That to me casts suspicion right from the onset.
Yeah, I'm suspicious. Lazar's one of those fascinating characters of history, which I'm not sure if we're ever going to be able to pin down. He's almost like an Oswald, you know. There's always going to be people with different theories of where Bob Lazar stands. And was he a good guy or a bad guy or a patsy, or what was he? My suspicion is that Lazar isn't just some maverick lying. My suspicion is that Lazar was either intentionally showing something and then, you know, catch and released, you know, then sent back out to tell the story, or they took him and, you know, prepared him and let him know what he had to say and then released him. I don't think that Lazar's entirely lying. That doesn't mean the story mightn't be a lie, but I think he in some capacity was genuinely involved there, because there are things which weirdly, you know, really make you think that he must have had some inside knowledge. The fact that he could take people to watch these test flights, could he just have driven out there by himself and noticed something one night? Yeah, maybe, but it's a pretty big maybe. You know what I mean? That he just happened to be watching the base and worked out when they were doing their test flights. Although I'm suspicious about the Jeremy Corbell documentary as well. I like George Knapp, but he's obviously has a dog in this fight because he's the person who's been promoting Lazar since 1989 or something. So he produced that Jeremy Corbell documentary, which Donny talked about before. And interestingly, I think it's a great doco. I think people should watch it. It's a fascinating documentary. But I'm still suspicious of the data in there. One of the stories, and I haven't done any research to check on it, but if it's true, it is another feather in the cap of Bob Lazar. And that is when Jeremy Corbell rolls out this investigation he's done. He's found a hand scanning unit which measured bone length in people's hands when they supposedly scanned into S4. And Lazar had been supposedly, and he said he's on record saying, I'm not sure, but had been telling this story for years, and nobody ever believed him that that's how you scanned in. And then Corbell finds proof that now they've declassified the type of technology they were using to let people into these, top secret facilities. And there it is. So again, if Lazar has been saying that all these years, and again, I haven't gone back to check if he has, but take them at face value for a moment, then he at least knew how people scanned into these facilities where nobody should have known how they scanned in. So these things tend to start building up, and I start to think he has some kind of inside knowledge. Somebody's taken him aside and told him something, or he was there, or it just seems like I don't think he's totally being disingenuous, but I still don't believe that the narrative's necessarily a true narrative. I'm still suspicious of who Bob Lazar really is.
Yeah, I was watching, this is some time ago. This is probably 6 months ago. And I got to tell you what, this was fascinating. It really was. I wasn't big. I never seen the George Knapp interview with Bob Lazar. I never heard it. Now, one of Donnie's favorites, I was watching Joe Rogan and I was watching Jeremy Corbell, and it was about 3 hours on YouTube, and it was Bob Lazar, Jeremy Corbell, and Joe Rogan. And I tell you what, Dr. Dean, it was fascinating. I was riveted. I hung on to every word. But you know what my biggest problem with that whole thing was? It seemed like a marketing ploy on the side of Jeremy Corbell, because that guy he struck me as advertising. He struck me as marketing, a money man. And Joe Rogan's Joe Rogan. We know what his deal is. So for me, after listening to all this riveting testimony, which I found fascinating, I mean, I've watched it twice, it still left me, boy, not so sure. 50-50, flip a coin.
You could tell Joe Rogan was getting kind of annoyed with Jeremy Corbell throughout the course of that show a few times. I mean, he came off as kind of annoying. I was like, man, yeah.
So there's a quick someone made a comment, and I think this is a good sort of question to address. It says Lazar could just be, Glenn's point is, Lazar could just be portrayed as an attention-seeking liar or as fantasy prone, whereas Epstein had to be done away with because he could name names and there was people. And I think that's a valid point. It might be easier just to say, hey, instead of investing all of this time and energy in taking care of him, even when it could have been done very easily without a whole lot of fanfare, it would be easier for him to go out there and sort of paint him as a nut job, instead of, to I think Rob's point earlier, if you kill him and it looks suspicious, it would validate what he's saying.
I think that's a really valid position. I also think historically, nobody's had any problem with topping people, even if it does look suspicious. We were talking about various conspiracy researchers before. Look at Jim Keith. Falls off a stage at Burning Man, has a slight problem in his leg, goes to get it fixed at a hospital, dead. And there's there's plenty of stories like that we've all heard about, people who might have worked for a certain political dynasty and suicide by shooting themselves 3 times in the back of the head or something, right? At that level, nobody seems to care that it looks suspicious, because if the mainstream media aren't going to run the story that it's suspicious, it just gets forgotten anyway. So to the point, I think there was, for whatever reason, there was no desire to stop Lazar telling his story. For whatever reason that is, whether the story was BS, whether it was manufactured, whether it had some truth in it, whatever the reason, there was no desire to stop him, or he would have been stopped.
I think maybe another reason why the government would be less motivated to do something like that to Bob Lazar was because the topic that he dealt with, comparing him with Epstein, the topic that Lazar dealt with was such a fringe topic anyway, that I'm sure the people who made the decisions in government were probably like, so few people are even into that topic at the time in the 80s. Most of the people aren't going to believe it anyway. He's just going to be some novelty that shows up on 2020 primetime, and people are going to forget about him. And there's only going to be a select few fringe people, because the the UFO community at this time is fringe. Back then, it was extra fringe, right? So they probably thought it wasn't even worth it. Whereas someone like Epstein, who's got legitimate dirt on some very powerful people that can ruin a lot of reputations, maybe that was the difference between the two of them.
Can I? I think that's a very valid point. I really do. I think it's a great point and something that needs to be considered. The only thing I would say, or the only caveat I'd put on that is, but we do see, again, from the late 70s, early 80s, military intelligence going out of its way to create this UFO culture and really be hands-on with the formation of this culture. And we've done a lot of shows on MK Ultra and its Operation Mockingbird, things like that, that leads me to say, okay, it was fringe at the time. It's not fringe now, but is that by design, right? And it goes back to, I can't say if Bob Lazar is an asset, an agent, or is just being manipulated by them. But either way, however this happened, the bigger point is clearly the government is okay with him doing what he was doing. And from very early on, he was taking, again, the black mailbox, right? He was taking people to watch these things happen. So he knew when they were going up. They knew he knew when they were going up, and they knew those people were there. It's Area 51. Of course they knew. Again, if Area 51 was what it was supposed to be, they would have run these people off. They would have done something, right? But they didn't, which means for whatever reason, they wanted people to see what they were doing to perpetuate a particular narrative. Again, whether he was in on it or he was just being manipulated, that's up for the viewers to decide. But it's very clear that the government wanted this to happen. Now, I will say this, I'm really suspicious of him being, to Dean's point, he clearly had inside knowledge. Either he worked there or he was given the knowledge. But I go back to, we talked about Norio Hayakawa on on Mysterious Library a few months ago. We did his little 30-minute documentary. I highly recommend it. The Conspiratologist. I think you can find it on YouTube.
It's on Vimeo for free.
Oh, Vimeo,
so
yeah.
The filmmakers have it there for free, so you're not watching a pirated version or anything.
Yeah.
Go to Vimeo, look for The Conspiratologist, and you'll see the documentary Jason's talking about.
Yeah, it's a great documentary. But one of the things he talks about is that he was one of the early interviewers for Bob Lazar. And the thing that really stood out is he was talking about how when he was interviewing Bob Lazar, there were people in dark suits just at Bob Lazar's house hanging out. And
one of them was operating some like piece of machinery while they were standing next to Bob Lazar. And Bob Lazar, wherever he went, somebody went with them. And Bob Lazar's house didn't look like it was a lived-in house. It wasn't properly furnished. It just looked like a poorly designed stage house to do the interview in.
Yeah. So, yeah. So it goes back to, at the end of the day, for me, again, I can't say what it is. I have my suspicions, but at the very least, what can be decided is the government wants him saying what he's saying, or they would have done something about it. To Dean's point, it's not like they've had to hide a whole. There was the guy who broke the what would eventually become the Iran-Contra scandal, but the fact that the CIA was helping smuggle crack cocaine into LA to fund the Iran-Contras. He was done away with pretty easily, and it was pretty obvious that he was done away with, and nobody seemed to care. So it's like if someone's going to be, if someone's Epsteining was going to make a noise, it would be an actual reporter working for the LA Times after breaking that story. And yet everyone's like, well, I guess he just had a really bad day. So that's my problem is if they can, again, all the people who've disappeared, and to Rob's point, there have been researchers into the UFO community that have passed under very mysterious circumstances. Nothing happened. Yeah. So if he was saying something they didn't want him to say, I don't think he'd be saying it for very long.
And I got to ask too, because I do have something. We'll do it in the second half because I had a cool story I'd like to ask Dr. Dean about, according to what you just brought up, Jason. But I do have to ask. I'm not an aeronautical engineer or I'm not a technical guy. And when you listen to the Bob Lazar story, for those of us novices, a lot of what he says is like so fascinating with this technology. Was this a guy now either pro or con? Because I'm not going to give my opinion on the Bob Lazar story.
Do
I
it,
will
Rob.
say that
Do it, Rob.
I do believe that there is alien technology. I'll leave it at that. However, the things he was talking about, why would a person go ahead and just make that up? Because it's so scientific and it's so well put together. And if you go back and look at several of the interviews, the man does not stumble. I mean,
Yeah.
unless he has an IQ of a million as a photographic memory, his story is always the same and never changes. And just like when we talk about cryptid people, when they have encounter stories, the ones that are always the same, they never change, are the more believable ones. This guy, if you want to give him credit, everything he says, it's never alters. He's never once slipped up. So I can see where it's believable. But on the other side, which I mentioned earlier, I just didn't like that interview because I thought it was all a marketing ploy. Going back to that,
and incidentally, I think Bob Lazar is a very intelligent man. I'm sure he has a genius plus level IQ. I think it's interesting some of the things Lazar says, which are contradictory to other positions that you might or might not believe in the conspiracy world. One thing he says is there's no way on earth we could have made this type of technology. This anti-grav stuff I'm describing isn't ours. But Stan Deyo, who I spoke to recently on Talking Weird and who I've been very interested in his books for years. In fact, his book, The Cosmic Conspiracy, is what got me interested in this stuff when I was a young adult, as 15 or something. According to Stan Deyo, and I haven't looked further into this. Again, I'm a social scientist. I'm not a hands-on practical scientist. But there was an awful lot of study being done and published in peer-reviewed journals and other magazines in a period in the 1950s about anti-gravity research all over the planet. USA, Canada, Russia, UK, everywhere. And all of a sudden, it all just vanished. No more talk about it. It just went. So two things. One, people were working on this kind of technology in the 1950s. We know that, right?
Yes.
So that doesn't mean Lazar's lying. He might have no idea that people were working on this stuff in the 1950s. But secondly, to Stan Deyo's point, is if that technology was all of a sudden just removed from historical or not mentioned again in peer-reviewed journals all over the planet, then that suggested to Deyo, and it's a point he's been making literally since the 1970s.
Yeah.
It suggested to Deyo that there was some organization or force or whatever that had the ability to shut down this globally. Now, that's a whole different way of looking at any type of conspiracy theory. That's different to looking at a CIA hit job or looking at, a Kennedy assassination or looking at, our standard type of, Q stuff, whatever your conspiratorial taste is, to think that some organization was able to stop scientific developments in multiple countries within the space of a year. So perhaps, Liz, if there is something like that, perhaps there's a very good reason that those individuals would want to narrow that this technology had been created by off-world forces. And this is sounding crazy conspiratologist myself now.
Yeah.
But there'd be a reason if Deyo is right and this technology existed in the 50s and somebody just kind of stopped the research and I assume took it over, right? Then there'd be a reason that you might want people like Bob Lazar presenting the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And it's interesting that Lazar was rolled out again big time after the New York Times story broke in 2017 about Tic Tac, where we wanted this narrative again, that there was extraterrestrial technology. It wasn't that Lazar had been forgotten, but he hadn't been front and center for a long time. And then the Lazar narratives rolled out again. Like the documentary was probably when was that documentary released? We were talking about Donny, like 2019, or it was released a few years ago.
Around there, yeah.
They probably started making that thing in 2017. It takes a while to get a film done from, production to presentation. So my suspicion is the Lazar story was rolled out again because it fit a narrative which was being told officially this time. That yes, there are things buzzing the skies which we don't know what they are, and you see it across the board. You see it when they roll out Navy pilots. Well, this isn't anything we have. They roll out Bob Lazar again. This isn't anything we have. You roll out DoD spokesman. This isn't anything we have. Seems like a lot of people are saying this isn't anything we have.
By the way, thank you, Scott.
Yes,
Rob's
thank you, Scott.
Bandana Fund
Bandana
thanks
Fund.
you.
Yeah. Yes,
By
it
the
does.
way-
Thank you so much. In fact, Brown Dwarf, I don't see him in the chat, but he made me a bandana. I sported it last week, and he sent it to me. If Brown Dwarf's out there, thank you. I'll have to wear it. I'll wear it tomorrow. But thanks, Scott and Brown Dwarf, for my bandana he sent me. I got a quick question, Dr. Dean.
Sure.
I think back in I was just reading this in preparation for the show. Back in the 1960s, the CIA started declining any of their involvement in actually what we're talking about today, and started with the Project Blue Book in 1969. Why do you think they just declined any involvement in that? Was there something that they just wanted to keep their hands off?
Well, we don't, of course, when a department says something, we don't know how literally to take them. And we also don't know whether the spokesman is talking for some backroom operation, which everybody in the department doesn't know anyway. The same way sometimes when a Department of Defense secretary comes out now, I can't believe that Department of Defense secretary knows every black budget operation going on in the broader defense industry today. I just can't. So some of those statements might have been legitimate. I do know that the CIA, there's a relatively famous paper written by a CIA historian, meaning somebody employed by the CIA who took care of their historical records. And it came out when I was doing my dissertation, so sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that CIA report said that in the 1960s, the CIA thought that something around 60-something% of flying saucer sightings in the US were misidentifications by Americans of things like the U-2. And the CIA were happy that that was the case. So there's a reason you might want to spin that story that you're not involved, but there may be crazy things out there, because it just, it tends to take eyes away from what's really going on. So I think that kind of cover for the U-2 story, I think the cover for Area 51, I think it mightn't even be, to forget what I was saying about Standeo's theories before, it mightn't even be malicious. It might be as simple as, we don't want the Soviets to know what we do or we don't have, so we'll start this ET story. Or we don't want the Chinese to know that we're flying this tic-tac technology, so we're going to roll out all these Navy pilots and Defense Department spokesmen saying it's not ours, it's not ours. I mean, who knows what the actual agenda is? I could take a number of guesses, but I don't for a minute believe that there was no government involvement in UFOs at an intelligence level from 1969 up until, when was the Lou Elizondo program? It was meant to be from mid-2000s or something.
Yeah, mid-2000s,
whatever. There were things happening within that period. Now, what they were and what the real interest was, I don't know. But there's no way that all of a sudden the entire Defense Department said, we don't care about mysterious things seen in our skies. That would be negligent for starters. I wouldn't want the Defense Department to go, we're not going to listen to these crazy reports of weird things in the skies. Are you crazy? You got to listen to this. Who knows what it is? So there's a lot of spin. There's a lot of half truth. There's a lot of total just nonsense being talked about. I don't know. I'm just a social scientist, really. I just try to gauge it within the culture of the day.
And real quick, just for everyone in the chat, because not everyone knows you, not everyone's heard our conversation on the subject. This is not to say that there isn't a real separate UFO phenomena, right?
Sure.
You know, again, Dean and I have a very similar view, which is there is absolutely a truly unique and non-human originated phenomena occurring. But that within that phenomena, though, the United States government and military, intelligence operations, all of it, have actively manipulated modern UFO belief, again, for its own purposes, is our broader point, right? And so that's sort of the nature of the question is, if it was the story that we are being presented by people like Bob Lazar and others, the question becomes, wouldn't they have been taken out if they're not? Because it was Falafel, I think. Let me pull that up real quick. Yeah, Falafel Bay says, who's protecting Bob Lazar? Well, that's ultimately the question we're trying to ask and answer. But I think the real question is he being protected, or is he doing either because he's being paid to say it, or because he's been manipulated to say it? Is he saying what they want him to say? Therefore, he doesn't need protection. They're helping to promote him because he's presenting a narrative they want, the people in the military and in the government the deep state want this narrative out in the world for one reason or another.
I mean, Lazar could have been put in place. I haven't even thought about this until now, but because we were talking about everything post Tic Tac and post New York Times story, Lazar could have been put in place back then for some plan that wanted to roll Lazar out again now and say, see, we had a guy who was saying we were making these sources back in 1989. And what are flying around now? ET kind of sources that we were back engineering, who knows? I mean, there might be long range games that we can't even imagine. One thing I'm pretty sure of is whatever theory I have is probably wrong, other than the fact that there's manipulation going on. What Rick Doty's real role was in AFOSI, whether he was just went rogue like some people suggested, or whether he was actually taking command from higher up to establish other things. I think the same goes for William Moore. What real role he was playing? Was he just a patsy for Rick Doty, or were they part of a broader plan? And I think the same goes when we look at Bob Lazar. What role was he really playing? Was he just somebody who went whistleblower and Maverick? Was he somebody then released to set up a spin story to test if there was a mole working at Area 51? Who knows? I mean, we don't know, but there certainly has been an ongoing, not just one, there's been ongoing programs in the intelligence departments, both military and probably civilian, involving UFOs dating back to when these things started, haunting American skies. And it makes total sense. I mean, again, you have to be. And if you look at things like the Robertson panel back in the very early days, they were genuinely concerned. What's going to happen, if we think it's a Soviet attack, or can the Soviets play with this? Or are we going to choke communication lines when people see too many sources? You couldn't exist through the Cold War without paying real attention to this if you were in intelligence. This was something that people looked at again and again and again.
No, that's a great point. Real quick, and I'm not going to say that this was part of my that the reason I titled the show this way is why I did it. But Wendy Guazdala, I'm pretty certain I butchered that name, and I apologize. She says, I have to tell you that I had to search for the show, whereas it's normally at the top of my home screen on YouTube. Wendy, this goes back to what we were essentially the entire point of this show. It's manipulation. I threw a name out there that YouTube doesn't like, and probably two names. Their algorithms could probably see, oh, hold on, Lazar, this is probably not going to go the way we want. So it's ranked a little lower. That's why you have to share this show out.
Hurry, we gotta save the algorithm, folks. Someone talk about BTS right now.
Yeah, quick, someone type. Talk about BTS. Actually, I'll have to talk to Donnie after this. A friend of mine went to I can't remember if he's from BTS, but he had a solo show here in the US. Anyway, I'll have to talk about that after the thing. But yeah, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about Bob Lazar in a way that they don't want us to talk about. Which is why it gets downranked. But if we were over here saying Bob Lazar is the greatest thing in the history of the world, it would have been at the top of your feed. It's not a coincidence. If Bob Lazar was saying things they don't want him to say, again, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm not going to say he is a plant. I'm just going to say whatever, at the end of the day, what we can know for a fact is if he was saying what they didn't want him to say, he wouldn't be able to say it. Like Paul Hellyer, right? He was the Canadian defense minister. He's like essentially, imagine if Donald Rumsfeld had come out and said, yep, aliens are real. That would, someone like, if you say, well, the reason they can't get rid of Paul Hellyer is because he is too big. Again, to Dean's earlier point, doesn't seem to stop anybody from doing that kind of thing. And maybe he is too big. Okay, I'll buy that story for Paul Hellyer. But Bob Lazar in the late 80s, early 90s, I don't think he's Paul Hellyer level. So either way, he's not, at the very least, he's not saying something that they view as dangerous.
Don't forget, they probably threw James Forrestal out of a mental hospital window as well, right, back in the day.
Oh, exactly.
So they'll get rid of Defense Department people, no problems. If they're, I mean, that's a real possibility that he was suicided as well, probably.
With the Bob Lazar discussion about him, and we all have our wherever your viewpoint is, your slant on that, I get. But don't you think, though, and correct me, Dr. Dean, don't you think Luis Elizondo in today's day and age would be a bigger threat to our government with the things that he comes up with? He's not necessarily a whistleblower, but he does what he presents. Again, you can take it for what it's worth, whether you believe it or not. But he's anti-government in a lot of his statements.
Well, Lou Elizondo is obviously an interesting cat. He's also said, of course, that everything he says, he's been told he's allowed to say. He's on record saying that I'm a patriot. I would never go break my secrecy oath. So Elizondo is, I don't want to single him out because he's easy for me to single out and be mean about, but I'm suspicious that so much of our knowledge about, and somebody will respond to this, what I'm about to say, and say, well, of course our knowledge is going to come from the insiders. They're the people who know. But why is it that, like, the old board of NICAP, the first major, civilian investigation unit headed by Donald Kehoe, who himself was an ex-Marine major, right? But his board was like ex-admirals and ex-CIA directors. Why is it that to the Stars Academy, all of those people are ex-intelligence insiders, Again and again, these people that are meant to be at the top of the civilian food chain helping us solve the UFO mystery are people who were inside there once before, presumably when they were inside, stopping us knowing these secrets. It seems to me like now I'll get a little political, when somebody who used to be, the head of Goldman Sachs becomes head of the Fed or something, it seems like these people are playing both sides. It's like, why on earth am I going to think that you're telling me the truth? You're going to be, and it might even be malicious again. There might be real reasons that they have for wanting me not to know what the secret is about UFOs. I have no idea really what the motives are, but I find it weird that all of these people that present, the golden stories, whether, again, going back to Rick Doty and William Moore, that's where Roswell's story comes from. People don't even talk about this. The Roswell story, the MJ-12 story, all the Dulce Underground base stories, all that component of UFO belief, and it's a massive component, and Area 51 is the final piece, really, right? All of that stuff is channeled out of a handful of people who all knew each other and worked together. Doty, William Moore, Stanton Friedman, Jamie Shandera. It's like all of my belief systems are coming from these people who were mostly either in intelligence or intelligence assets. And then we have Bob Lazar, who supposedly worked on the inside and never got Epstein'd. And then now Elizondo's giving me all the secrets, and the Stars Academy, they're all intelligence military people. And NICAP used to be headed by all these people. It's like, of course, and it makes total sense. And this is something Doty said as well. Of course, we want to know what's going on in these organized civilian organizations. It makes, why not just take them over? Why not just co-opt them, which seems to be what's happened again and again. The whole narrative's been co-opted, I think, to be honest.
Real quick, thank you, Jared Crazy Indian, and thank you, Be Kind. Really appreciate y'all. Thank y'all. Y'all are the best. We really do love y'all. And real quick, Be Kind has a great point here. And did it disappear? Oh, here it is. She says, Bob Lazar is the best thing since sliced bread. So help out the algorithm. Y'all, everyone type that in real quick so that YouTube thinks that we're on their side.
Fantastic.
Can I give you my reason for being suspicious of Bob Lazar? Is because that dude looks way too much like Stephen King. That dude looks like Stephen King, man. He looks like a slightly younger version of Stephen King. I think Bob Lazar and Stephen King might both be reptilians in disguise. That's what I think.
I'm all for that. I don't try. Mind you, I like Bob Lazar more than King, but that's a song for another time.
Exactly. Yeah. Last time I checked, Bob Lazar didn't write about 13-year-olds doing unspeakable things.
They both brought me the same levels of entertainment, though.
I gotta tell you, I'll forget it.
We got a few minutes before we got to go. Let me throw up a quick couple of things. Here we are. Crystal J says, I think he meaning Lazar, and again these others are still alive because they could be labeled. He could be labeled as a martyr. Okay.
Oh, I think she was trying to say martyr.
Martyr, yeah. And too many people knew him. They also may thought people, label him as crazy. I think that's a point we've made, right? It's if he disappears under mysterious circumstances, he becomes a martyr to some, and it's easier to write him off as crazy. I think that's a very valid point. And Titan 70, I would like to see Jason wear a Viking helmet
or a pith helmet, like you do at the beginning of every episode of Mysterious Library in the little cute animation.
Yeah, I've got some helmets I need to start wearing. Apparently,
Yeah,
I'll,
every
I'll,
episode. That should be your shtick, a helmet every show, man.
I wonder if one of the reasons why they left Bob Lazar alone is because they kind of wanted to see what would happen.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's as valid a point as any. Again, that's sort of the thing, right? We're not saying what the reason is, but I think at the end of the day, whatever he and these others are saying, the military-industrial complex clearly want them saying it, or at least they find it useful for some reason,
or they're allowed to say it.
Yeah. And you know what? To the commenter who made the martyr point, I understand that point, and it's a popular point. I think we've almost been convinced to think that's a reason they don't top people, though. Like, again, we talked about Jim Keith before, Danny Casolaro. There's presidents who've been topped. There's, all kinds of people who've been removed. I think if there's some type of conspiracy, which, the popular idea of thinking something which controls the intelligence agencies and controls the mainstream media, and I'm not even saying there is, let's just assume there is. When you top somebody, you just don't make it front page news, and most people are not going to care. That's the reality. The story track will stay in conspiracy circles. They killed Bob Lazar. They killed the man who said Area 51 was real. There are also reptoids living under Dulce. It's like, let those crazies say what they want to about that we killed Bob Lazar. Well, no one's going to listen to them anyway.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's a great point, because if Bob Lazar was to be eliminated, it would just, the ufology community, everything, it would be it would be front page news in those communities, perhaps on local television, maybe mainstream media. It'd be filled every day for 7 days a week for 3 months.
It's all people would talk about ever.
It's all they would talk about. And you know what's going to happen? We're all talking about it, and people are going to start to wake up maybe and start investigating. You're going to have more people out of the woodwork investigating, which is what the government doesn't want. So it's going to create this entire mass influence that is not wanted.
I think that's a remarkably optimistic view of this community, to be honest. It would, again,
in our community, perhaps, but Jason, there are Bob Lazar like worshipers out there.
Well, now, this goes back to what,
because Bob Lazar is the greatest for the YouTube algorithm.
Because they rolled it out again post 2017 TikTok videos when they needed say there's been somebody who's told us there were crash sources and there was this technology.
And before we go really quick, I know we're got a minute to go really quick. What did you think about that whole thing where they said it was unidentified and then all of a sudden retracted it was a drone? Our government.
I'm suspicious of when they use unidentified flying object. I always think these people aren't stupid. They're not mistakenly using a term that 90+% of the public identify with flying saucers and little green men. They use that term to make people's ears pop up and think flying saucers and little green men. So then I'm like, why did they use that term?
Yeah, that's not an accident.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to take our standard 5-minute break, but real quick for Outlaw Angling. Says, hey, this is Jason Phillips, the chiropractor. Found your channel last week, and I've watched you listen for so many episodes. Love you all. Thank you. And by the way, Jason, I actually need to call you.
Jason getting a visit by his chiropractor. That's a first.
Yeah, and my chiropractor is going to get a visit here pretty soon. So expect a call from me in the near future. We'll be back in 5 minutes. So smoke them if you got them, and then we're going to get to again more great comments from Dean and some of y'all's great questions and comments, including Tex's question from earlier in the hour. We'll see y'all in 5.
All right.
4 minutes to go, folks. 4 minutes. Three minutes. We're almost there. Two-minute warning, guys. 2-minute warning. One minute. 1 minute.
And welcome to the second hour of Jason McLean Questions Everything live. As y'all, if you didn't join us early enough in the first hour, again, Jason McLean Questions Everything is now a YouTube channel. And over there, we are going to be doing pre-recorded videos, shorter, more easily digested topics and concepts. So again, after this is over, the link's in the description below. Hop on over, like, follow, subscribe. The first thing is going up this weekend. And it's going to be a very interesting conversation we're going to have over there. Don't worry. Questions Everything Live is going to stay on the channels that you're watching for right now. So before I bring everybody up or back, let me just say thank you to y'all in the chat. Again, y'all are the best audience on the internet. I'll fight anyone who says otherwise. I really will. Probably with a knife. I do cheat. But again, we love y'all. Y'all the reason we do this. And I know that's a sentiment that is shared by Bigfoot Michigan Rob and Donny Cho as well.
Yes, it is. It's we do have
You
the
guys
best
are.
chat rooms. We have the best chat rooms
Mm-hmm.
across the board on all our channels. And with that being said, a special thanks to Be Kind, Jared, Scott, Text Times 2, and Truth Defender for your amazing super chats. That does help support our shows. We do appreciate
Mm-hmm.
when you donate, and we love you guys for that. Thank you so much. Don't forget, Mondays is Texas Front Porch, 7:00, 9:00 in the East on Mondays. Tuesdays is Van Buren Variety, 8:00 in the East.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond BMR, 9:00 in the East. And then the good Dr. Dean and Jason, they got something, Mysterious Library on Untold Radio AM, that comes on at 10 in the East. Go check them out. It's fascinating work that they do over there. And thank you guys. Wednesdays is Jason McLean Questions Everything. And don't forget, Jason McLean Questions Everything is going to a YouTube channel very soon. So be sure you subscribe when that comes out. Thursday's Brunch with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. Tomorrow at 1 in the East. And I got to tell you really quick, a quick promo for that. Mike Bueller is on with me tomorrow. He had a fascinating Bigfoot encounter, which is similar to mine. It had a manifestation, a morph. It turned into something demonic. Kind of the only one I've heard that's is kind of like mine. So tune in tomorrow for that. And then later on in the evening, 9 in the East, the Blondes, the Booze, the Paranormal Podcast. Check them out. Friday, you want some woo with the booze. You, of course, have the Blondes and the Booze Paranormal Podcast. Saturday, Text, Danielle Diva, Infamous Minds, True Crime, Murder, Mayhem, 3:00 Eastern Standard Time. Check it out. Show them some love. Awesome show. And of course, we got Jessica Jones and Danielle on Space Out Radio at 10 and 11 Eastern Standard Time on Saturday and Sunday. Back to you, Jason.
Thank you, Rob. Speaking of Dr. Dean and I on Untold Radio, on the Untold Radio Network, we do a show called Mysterious Library. Let me go ahead and bring him back up because he does a show on Saturday, Talking Weird.
Awesome.
And, 10 p.m. Central, where I always have fascinating guests and we talk all kinds of weirdness, as the title suggests. A point I was thinking about, I'd just like to make quickly, is the Bob Lazar situation is a great example of, I think, how people are manipulated to think and to choose a side. We're kind of convinced that there has to be binary thinking on issues like this. Yeah. Lazar has to be a liar and a hoaxer, or he has to be telling the truth. They're normally the positions that are put forward. Like if you watch a documentary about Bob Lazar, even if it's favorable, they're the two positions that are put forward. You're a liar and you're a hoaxer, or it's real. Those middle grounds aren't put forward. That maybe you're told to say this, or maybe you've been patsied into saying this, or maybe there's some truth in here. So I think a lot of these things are so, and politically as well, it's the same. Things are so much more complicated. I think there's a status quo which benefits from people who are forced to pick a side when neither position might be the correct position to make. And I think Lazar's a great example of that. It's also a great example how things like this, I don't know, debilitating or perhaps paralyzing is a better word. You have something out there which is, it's going to make people, again, pick a side. And it's so hard to, though, get to prove that point because, well, he also got involved in a brothel at one stage. And he also, there's no records about him from, the university he went to. But he knows that there was this hand measuring machine and he knows when the UFOs took off. So you get stuck in this argument when it doesn't even let you kind of move out of it. It's meant to keep people focused on questions that can't be answered. And as a result, it's paralyzing, frankly.
Yep.
It's meant to be.
They say the truth is always somewhere in between, within the cracks.
But maybe it's not in between, it's over here. But as long as you're focusing on one of these two, you can't even, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's so far over here that you can't see it because it's not even in between, it's over here. So as long as you're focused on this stuff over here, again, both sides, you don't have, the whole point is the Overton window is such that the truth is outside of that window on either side. And so the conflict itself is the point. I think we talked about this on one of the shows where it's the conflict is the point. They want that conflict, right? Because as long as you're fighting over this, you can't see this over here. So I think that's a great point. Real quick, Truth Defender, his super chat says there are now again for those of you who may not know, this is Paul. We've had him on the show a number of times. He has experience with the company, as we'll say. He was in the military and had some. Again, I recommend those episodes. He says there are no accidents when it comes to dark projects / skunk works. These guys don't just slip through the cracks. There are worse things than death. Trust me.
And I remember Truth Defender from when you guys did the episode about the Chinese spy balloons and the train derailments.
Yeah.
That was a few months ago. I remember that one.
Yeah.
That was a good show, folks. Go back and watch that if you haven't.
Well, and again, this is Rob and I, we can attest to this. We did a story on the Dogman, and he was talking about them being artificially created dogmen being used in military deployment. There were things he couldn't say online, on the live show. So we were talking afterwards. Again, the stream is dead. It's off. It's us behind. It's us in the back studio. He starts talking. His feed dies. Both of our phones reboot.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, me and Jason both tried to call him or text him, and it was like dead air, dead line. And it was so funny, Jason, if you recall, because I do remember this. He goes, "Okay, guys, I'm off here. I could probably say this, with you guys." And then and as soon as he started, not even 4 syllables into it, boom. Yep. And then me and Jason almost kind of immediately call him. Nothing. It was, you don't get a busy tone on your phone. It goes to voicemail or it answers, right?
Yeah.
We got an actual busy tone, which I haven't heard that in God knows
decades.
How long.
Yeah, probably 20 years. And my phone rebooted. And here, okay, I can't say who it was because I haven't gotten the permission to say it.
Yeah.
But someone known to all of us, and Dean and I personally had a very similar experience very recently where not only did his phone reboot, again, his cell phone, not connected to anything, it rebooted. Every electronic in his house rebooted at the same time, talking to similar people about similar things. So just saying, when unlike other individuals in the community, we know that he is actually military, that he was in the military. So I'm just saying, when he says there's things worse than death, I think we all know that that's true instinctively. I'm just saying, carries a little bit of weight.
Man, that terrifies me, honestly.
Yep.
It is terrifying. It's so, and believe me, I don't believe.
Glenn, let me check.
It's not a coincidence either.
Not today. Although I'm not kidding. Seriously, I've had a couple of slow drive-bys during the day, and I'm like, because my office is in my closet where I work in here all day long. This is where I work, and I leave my shades open for the daylight because I don't like. I've become my father. I hate lights being on if I can avoid it. And every once in a while, this SUV will drive by very slowly, and I'm like, and once they get over here, they just sort of disappear because I can only see for so long. And it's happened a couple of times. I'm like, what is going on? I'm assuming, again, I'm in that field, the real estate field. I'm entitled, but realtors will drive around, and so that's kind of what I'm assuming it is. Also, nosy neighbors, because we've got a lot of Californians in now, and they're like, why don't we have an HOA? Because we live in Texas. Go away. So that's kind of what I chalk it up to. But just saying.
Can I give you a suggestion, Jason?
Yep.
Actually, next time that happens, because you're usually in your office sitting where you are right now, right? And you're looking out the window when you see those cars go by. You should do something like ridiculous, like make a silly face or like lift your shirt and just start like dancing provocatively. But don't do it like out the window or anything. Just do it like, whereas if only one who would intentionally try to look in that window would see it. So they'll see if they respond. He knows we're on. He knows he's on to us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I'll get the body.
You gotta do that. You gotta make a weird face.
It's so funny since I started doing this with you guys a couple of years now. I'm just gonna say I'm not even mention names or anything. We did a show,
Ah.
and thank you, Titan. Yeah,
Yeah,
we did
we'll
a
talk about that in
show.
a second.
Yeah, we did a show, and it was about we were debating the actual landing on the moon, and did it happen? Did it not? Yada yada. Were we told not to come back by aliens? So we were into that. And Jason, you know the show. I'm sure you remember this. But now, and again, you guys, and I don't believe in coincidence, as I said, and I still don't. However, the next morning, it was really strange because where I live, there was a black SUV. You know how you always see on television the FBI's, they drive the Suburbans, the older models. They're not quite up to the year, but it's maybe 2 or 3 years old. There was one out there, and I'm looking out. I just happened to see this. It was like a half a block down, Suburban. I think nothing of it until a guy gets out in a suit. And he's like walking. He walks like maybe 30 feet toward my house, turns around, walks 30 feet the other way, gets in, goes on his cell phone, gets in the Suburban, takes off. Haven't seen that since. Never seen a Suburban drive through my neighborhood in the, the 10, 20 years I've lived here. I just found that odd. I kind of chuckled to myself, Jason, and everyone listening, because the show prior was kind of one of those shows you're up for debate whether you should do or not. But we did a fantastic job with it. Didn't say anything that would cause any damage.
Right. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm just defaulting to it's probably a realtor driving by every once in a while because again, Texas, everyone. But it's just weird. Just saying, it's just weird.
Jason, you should stand in the window holding a teddy bear and then stroke it menacingly while looking at the SUV.
So.
Yeah.
But I had two things I want to ask the good doctor about here before we get on to with the rest of the show. We're talking about the disappearances of well-knowns or whistleblowers. But what do you think about? Do you remember the story of Admiral Wilson, 1929, Antarctica, I think it was. And it was about, the ship, you all saw the Philadelphia experiment. And now he had brought in a report about losing time, mentioned that he thought it was perhaps an abduction. And of course, and he was a decorated admiral when he retired, and nothing negative came upon him, I don't believe. What's your take on that?
I'm aware of the Admiral Byrd story about Byrd going to Antarctica. I don't know if I know this Admiral Wilson story, to be honest. Because
it was Admiral Byrd. Did I say Wilson?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I meant Byrd. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And so Byrd's post World War II, right? Like, there's all these theories that there were Nazis down there still, so they sent Byrd down there to rout them out, and I think they took a considerable amount of film footage down there. And I used to have way back in the day, like supposedly. Perhaps what this story comes from, the secret diary of Admiral Byrd. It was published by one of those UFO type publishing houses. I don't know if it was Green Beckley's one back in the 90s and 80s, or if it was another Loom Panics or one of those smaller, weirder presses. I'm not sure if that story's ever been solidly linked to Byrd having written it. I'm aware of the story. I'm conscious that there's the theory that these things happen to Byrd, and I'm also conscious there's theories that he was down there fighting Nazis and they lost, and there's so many stories about what was it, Operation High Jump or something? Is that what it was called?
Yes, that's what it was. Yes.
What Operation High Jump was actually doing. I certainly think something weird was going on there, because that was a fairly militarized operation just to go and sail around Antarctica and look at penguins or something, right? Like something was going on. To be honest, I don't have any idea what was going on, but I'm slightly suspicious that the official narrative on that story isn't a legitimate narrative. What Byrd was actually doing there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, do you know what might have happened too? Conceivably, here's an idea I just had. There was certainly lots of stories about Nazis getting away after World War II, right? It was a popular story. So maybe they did, maybe they didn't, and maybe this campaign was a reaction to the idea that they were down there, whether they were down there or not. And that's just me totally guessing what was going on. I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, I got one other off-the-wall one too for us to kind of mull over before Jason gets into what I know what he wants to talk about really quickly. And Dr. Dean, you talked about the reptilians. You're early in the last half hour of the show. We were talking about all these strange phenomenon and whether it's believed or not believed, and whether people were eliminated or not. The one that comes to mind for me, though, is Paul Schneider, and you mentioned the Dulce base, 1979, and he's a geologist. He was not a member of the government, was contracted by the government, and he was actually put into an underground base. He was actually hoisted down in there because they wanted some geological records. They wanted to bring back some rock or some dirt or whatever for analyzation, to be analyzed, excuse me, and claim that there was 2 grays, alien grays, that he had to fight off, got attacked, and it was the Green Berets. They got him out, and 60 Green Berets supposedly entered this tunnel, and they were all killed. Now, my point is this: he went on different conferences. He was very well spoken about this. You can find it on YouTube. You can find he's all over the place. Supposedly he committed suicide, right? That's what they say. Even if you believe the story or not, to me, that's probably one of the first instances where maybe the government did silence this guy, if in fact this is even true.
Yeah, I'm aware of the stories. I'm not sure about whether he was whacked or not. Certainly, it's not impossible. I mean, I think there's all kinds of reasons throughout the history of government that people disappeared and people are killed. I mean, you can go back to Shakespeare and you can read Richard III, and whether Richard III got rid of the 2 heir apparents that were the sons of the real king, so he could be the king instead. Maybe he whacked them, maybe he didn't. But my point is, I think in history there's lots of examples of government killing people, whether the guy who supposedly was involved with that Green Beret expedition to fight the gray aliens. Of course, there's similar stories about underground bases and fighting aliens going all the way back to the Shaver mystery in the mid-1940s. Fred Chrisman said that he fought the Deros, the underground evil entities that were the main bad guys in the Shaver mystery stories, which Richard Shaver wrote under perhaps the tutelage of Ray Palmer, who ghost wrote supposedly a lot of the original stories and Amazing Stories. But Chrisman supposedly fought underground creatures as well when he was in the military in World War II. So there's a history of people saying that they go underground and fight alien beings. So I don't know. It's interesting, though. Again, and Chrisman's somebody who later got accused of being one of the 3 tramps at Dealey Plaza and involved in the JFK assassination. I think Garrison even subpoenaed him. So, and he's the main guy at Maury Island who picks up the UFO wreckage as well.
It kind of all of that kind of reminds me of the Vril in a way.
Yeah, the Vril Society as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the things we talk about on Mysterious Library, and we've talked about on Talking Weird as well when I've been on there. It's like, and this is one of those things that if you're in the UFO community, just doesn't get talked about, is, hey, all of these stories that are talked about today, they're seen as modern UFO ideas, they have a very long history. And the thing is, the phenomena keeps shifting and changing its identity as it goes. So again, this is sort of the ambiguity, and I want to get to Titan's question real quick, because I think it's a great question, and it sort of ties into this whole question. Is we don't know exactly where the government stops and the real stuff begins, right? We just don't. But it does seem like there's what the conversation that's being allowed to be had on both online and in the popular media is heavily influenced by what the government wants out there. To which Titan 70 asks, great topic, great visit. Always good to see Dr. Dean. What's y'all's advice to better discern between facts and fiction? We hear discredited testimony, but some, if not most, have seen evidence of UFOs. Blessings to y'all. I'll throw that one at Dean first, since he's the actual doctor.
Gosh, that is a good question. I mean, there's obviously a degree of common sense when we look at some of this, just straight off the bat. If something sounds really ridiculous, then check yourself. But the things I'm most concerned with, less than that type of obvious reality or craziness is that if there are people telling me this story that might have a reason for me wanting to believe this story, i.e., if these people are members of an intelligence agency or members of a government or recent ex-members of an intelligence agency or recent ex-members of the government, then I can't help but question, is this a narrative that they want me to believe? And that doubles up even more my suspicions when that seems to be a narrative which becomes popular in consensus media. So if the New York Times is telling me the story, if Lou Elizondo is telling me the story, if Department of Defense spokesmen seem to be telling me the story, if Bob Lazar seems to be now back in the forefront and telling me the story, if there's a narrative being built which is saying, look here at this shiny, crazy narrative, but there's so many people who think this is real, and they're rolling out Navy pilots telling me the story or telling me parts of the story, then I'm wondering why is it, and it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that if there's an alternative voice, that the alternative voice is necessarily telling me the truth as well, because there's all kinds of alternative voices saying all kinds of crazy stuff. But certainly if there's something being pushed as consensus narrative when itself is kind of nutty, you know what I mean? The idea of the government having extraterrestrial down sources and yada, 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 or whatever, then I'm doubly suspicious. I'm much more suspicious of that narrative than if I do find it on some, in some weird UFO magazine. So but I guess both things, common sense and be cautious of what's the source telling you this? Why? And might there be a reason they want you to believe it?
Thank you, Anello. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, the government can figure out alien technology, but they can't fill my pothole. Yeah, I'm supposed to believe that.
Well, they have. Well, maybe the reason they can figure out the alien technology is because they can't fill your. This is why they don't have time to fill your pothole.
Yeah, and for me personally, if we're trying to discern between fact and fiction, it's easier for a person like in my position where I've seen things, right? I'm a knower of a lot of things because I've seen actual evidence of things, right? And so if I'm trying to filter through something, I'm always giving the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, you have to have that skepticism, right? We got to weigh it out, really or not, because now for me, when it comes to ufology and things we're discussing tonight, hey, you guys, I'm 50-50 and with a lot of these things, especially with the Bob Lazar story. Part of me believes it. Part of me thinks, well, maybe it's fantasy. But what I always put in is always a common element, especially if you're listening to a person that's in the media or mainstream. If their stories are consistent over the last decade, unless you're a fabulous liar, then that I give credence to that, And even if we're talking about cryptids, there's always commonalities with these stories. They all have the common themes, and people just don't say this just to say it because they all match up. So you go with that, but if something comes out of the blue that you've never heard of, then you probably have to scrutinize it a little bit more and do some research on it.
Yeah,
that's fair. Real quick, say hi, howdy to Steve from Among the Missing.
Hey,
hello, Steve.
Lord Stockton has arrived, and I saw Sandy there too. Hi, Sandy.
Yeah, Sandy. I work with Steve and Sandy. They're great, right? Well, you all know Steve. Sandy's a fabulous writer too for Steve. So hi, Sandy.
They're great human beings.
Yeah, I love them both.
They're both great people. Can I attempt to answer Titan's original question about how do you discern from my own what I do personally?
Yes, absolutely.
I choose to stay agnostic. That's what I do. The way I approach this whole Freudian world that we're in, I treat it very similarly to my fandom of pro wrestling, in that, I know, like, okay, most of the people, when they think pro wrestling, 75-80% of the people, 90% of people are going to say, oh, the fake stuff, right? That's what they get hung up on. That's what they characterize it as. Whereas, I mean, I know it's fake, but I'm still a fan of it. I know it, but how is it any faker than Broadway? Right. I just enjoy it for what it is. I just take it in for what it is. I accept what I'm seeing. Like, I can listen to the most wooiest story and still be open-minded about it, and not totally buy into it, but still consider it. I could also listen to the skeptical side and still consider that, because I personally don't have a dog in the race. The same way I'm not hung up about pro wrestling being real or not. I could just enjoy the story.
That's a good point, Donnie, and I think it touches on something which is the reality of both of those spaces. And I love pro wrestling as well. I'm a massive fan. In fact, that's not true. I don't watch it much anymore, but I was a massive fan, like during the Attitude Era and going back to Hogan, like Piper used to be my guy, and then Stone Cold
Piper
Steve
was my guy too.
Piper's so
Piper was
great.
my guy.
So great. And then Austin, I was a massive fan of. My goodness. But anyway, all of those glory day wrestling's passed aside. I think they're both entertainment in many ways. I do think wrestling's entertainment, and I do think much of the paranormal's entertainment as well. And everybody knows my position who watches Talking Weird on Mysterious Library about flesh and blood cryptids. I think people have genuine experiences. I just don't think there's an ape wandering around North American woods who hasn't been discovered and is just, a creature like a bear. I do think people see Bigfoot all the time and have experiences all the time. I don't doubt the experiences, but I can still watch a movie which is presenting Bigfoot as a physical flesh and blood, either relict hominid or undiscovered North American ape. And I'm fascinated by it. I love Monster Quest, which is the position of that show. I love all kinds of documentaries about Bigfoot, but I don't share much of the ideas presented in them. I just enjoy them. So I think you can engage in ufology and cryptozoology just the same way you can engage in professional wrestling, and you can put that kind of, I'm going to be a debunker hat on the shelf and just enjoy the ride for sure. Speaking
of Bigfoot documentaries, we actually last night reviewed Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. We had Doug Hyjuk on to speak about it for a little bit. But we did it in honor of Sasquatch, The Legend Meets Science 2. The Kickstarter's live. We've got 7 days left, 1 week left to become part of history. So again, the link to that Kickstarter is also in the description below. So if you're so inclined, go throw some cash and let's get this thing funded so we can see the new developments. If you listen between the lines on last night's show, you may know where some of these things are going to be going. So it's going to be this is one of those things that's going to make history, and like the original is going to change the conversation. A lot of this stuff. So. Just saying. And if anybody can find you a physical flesh and blood Bigfoot and film it, it's Doug Hyjuk. Yeah. There's a guy who filmed the first giant undersea squid. He developed camera technology and went out and shot it. So if he can do that, if there's a Bigfoot out there running around the woods, he can go get you evidence of that as well. Yeah, Derek Galloway, for those who are listening, said, I'd pay to see Brock Lesnar wrestle Bob Lazar. I think we all would.
No, I disagree with that. You know who I would actually pay to see wrestle Bob Lazar is Jerry the King Lawler.
Okay. Oh yeah, that would be a good point.
Yeah. Or Mean Gene Okerlund.
Yeah, and with Derek's super chat, before we forget, because I know we have 20 minutes, whatever.
Yeah, 20 minutes left.
Be Kind, Jared, Scott, Text Times 2, Truth Defender, Titan, Anella, and Derek. Thank you for the super chats. We love you all. Appreciate you. Yeah. Real quick, let's hit these comments real fast. Although I will say this, I'd like to see the Von Erichs take on Bob Lazar. Just saying.
I want to see Lou Elizondo fight Ric Flair.
Woo!
That's what I need to see.
Sorry. I'm all for it. I'm all about it.
I want to see Lewis. I want to see him take on the CIA. His former, his former boss.
Yeah.
Okay, real quick. Let's jump through some of these real quick, because I do want to get to Texas question, because that's going to be a little bit more involved. So let's do.
Man, I gotta let my dog out right quick, so I'll be right.
Yeah, go for it. Let's do the quick comments. Glenn Dennison talking about my my future Shapodness with helmets that I should be wearing at Stahlheim. I will throw that on the list. Jared, the Crazy Indian, says Jason won't read this without smiling. Derek Galloway says Bob Lazar is one stem cell short from being Stephen King.
How come no one brought that up? He looks exactly like him. No one brought that up. It's weird to me.
Well, you did.
Like, that's the first thing I noticed. I was like, "Yo, this dude looked like Stephen King."
So maybe this is the pay-per-view. Bob Lazar versus Stephen King, so we can see if they're actually two different people.
I'd be ringside and throw a chair to Lazar and say,
yeah,
Oh,
Exactly.
they need to fight Paul Bearer.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul Bearer comes out with the urn.
Yes.
And it's not even the Undertaker. The Undertaker's like, oh, I'm going to stand back and I'm going to watch you do this one.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Exactly. Candy Wolf talking about the guitar that plays during our 5-minute break says, love that guitar. We all love that guitar, Candy. We really do. I'm going to say that one for Rob when he gets back. Also, Candy says, surprise, we all turned into our parents. One morning I literally just looked up in the mirror and I was like, it was my father. I was like, oh, getting to that point. Shade King says, these shows are my vice. This show is not a vice, Shade King. Or Shade King, Shade Viking. Like, I can't read. This is not a vice. This is a virtue. I mean, Donnie makes it a vice, but I'm just saying, overall, it's a virtue.
So one of the things I've noticed, going back to your point earlier, Dean, about people always putting things in a box and making it about size. One of the things I've been noticing in these podcasts where people do talk about the UFO phenomenon and extraterrestrials is that I find it funny how there's so many different types of UFOs, all these different shapes. There's cigars, spheres, saucers, pyramids, triangles, whatever. There's a whole gamut, all different sizes, shapes, colors, abilities, you name it, right? In terms of the different alien species that have been witnessed and reported, I got a book that lists them all right here. There's like 80 of them.
Yeah,
there's like the Arcturians, the Pleiadians. There's like 5 different versions of grays. There's the grays with the normal eyes and the grays with the black eyes. There's like 80 of them, right? So when people talk about this whole phenomenon, they always seem to talk about UFOs and aliens as if they're one team, one race, one agenda, one interest, right? Why can't the UFO phenomena be there's this alien race that's probably up to no good, that's manipulating our society in ways that we don't want, but then there are other UFOs that are flying around that are probably trying to put a kibosh on that and being like, hey, get out of here, Why do we always have to just assume they're all one thing?
You're right. There are aspects of ufology, and an example would be comparing Bud Hopkins with, say, John Mack. And you'd say these are both people looking at the abduction phenomenon, and their interpretation of the intent behind that phenomenon and the experiences their various patients or subjects are having seem to be positive if they're being looked at by John Mack, and seem to be negative if they're being looked at by Bud Hopkins or David Jacobs. So there's that division where there are people who say that, or you could look at an even more extreme example than John Mack. You could look at a UFO cult and say, well, these people are saying the Space Brothers are all good. So I see your point. There are people who tend to put them in boxes, but I do think there's an aspect of ufology that considers there's some type of Star Wars or Star Trek type Federation
like
battle
factions
going on where there's different things having different. I mean, I think a lot of the reasons we see, and again, there's no way I can prove this, but I think the reason that we see a lot of different ETs is because an incredible amount of this is psychological or sociological. So people are bringing a certain baggage to their experiences, or to their hypnotic regression, or to their dreams, or to whatever. And if there is a genuine external phenomenon, it might very well be tapping into some of that and presenting itself slightly differently, or sometimes very differently, depending upon what the person is expecting perhaps to see, or what the depths of their subconscious believes an extraterrestrial is going to look like. So I think what you're saying, the idea that there are lots of different ETs, species reported, is probably in many ways a key to working this out. It's a clue, at least, to why are there so many? What does this actually tell us about the phenomenon?
Real quick before we, because again, this one question, I know as soon as I put it up there, it's going to go forever. Rob, Glenn is wondering if perhaps your groundhog is actually a surveillance robot.
Well, last night on Ken Gerhard called it it was a cryptid. It was a cryptid groundhog haunting me. For those who have not heard, I had a groundhog in my backyard as I was putting my garden in. Scared the daylights out of me, so I extracted him humanely humanely. He's gone. Now my garden will flourish. That groundhog was bugging me, guys. I was not going to build my garden until I took the appropriate measures. The groundhog is now gone. But then
Groundhog
again,
had to go.
is he really? Is he really? Begs the question.
Did he have a whole family? Maybe
I think he might have been a rogue. I'm praying. See, where I live, Dean, Doctor, is there's a big horseshoe creek that runs through my big subdivision. And the guy in back of me, 50 yards in back of me, has a big pond full with fish. So ample water. So this rodent, gopher, groundhog, woodchuck, was caught underneath my deck, and he should be gone. So crossing my fingers on that. Thanks, Outlaw, for the super sticker.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you,
Now,
Jason.
are groundhogs the ones that have all these interconnected tunnels that form like a network, like that are those are prairie dogs, right? That do that?
They all do.
Yeah, they're all same.
So they're all interconnected. So you could have a whole slew of groundhogs. You don't even know about it.
Donnie, thanks for that.
Don't jinx him. Don't jinx him, dude.
Donnie. Thanks for that. I love you. Thank you.
Real quick for again, we were running out of time, so we got to hit these real fast. But real quick, if you're wondering why I got to call Jason, the chiropractor, here's the thing: I didn't hurt myself. I've lost 67 pounds, shooting for another 100-ish. So my back is realigning itself. I need it fixed because I have a chronically bad back. So I'm going to have to talk to him about that. Which, by the way, I'm going to be channeling a little bit more on the new channel, Jason McLean Questions Everything. He's going to channel a little my journey into health and talking about the supplements I'll be taking and dietary changes. Because honestly, I think we all need to be healthy.
You do look fantastic.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm going to look even more fantastic. I need to get back to my stripping weight.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, everyone. Jason ends up with a 6-pack.
Fantastic.
And he's gonna be flexing in front of the camera.
Just
come
on in body glitter and
glistening
and a kilt. Go back to the stage as the grease Scotsman.
He's gonna take selfie mirror shots at the gym, like all sweaty.
I will not become that douchebag.
That's what they all say, Jason, until they have that 6-pack and then it's lifting the shirt and taking the pic.
I do. When I work out, it's at the house. Back in the day, it's just so commercialized. Everybody, all these big guys, these big apers, right?
Yeah.
He's like, I ain't going in here no more. I look like I don't compare.
Yep. Channel Warhorse again talking about, to Dean's point, people going into these intelligence individuals going into these communities saying it's a form of intelligence gathering just to see what happens, but also allow again, even if he's saying things that are that's real, having Bob Lazar go out there and have that conversation is also a form of intelligence gathering. Even if everything he's saying is on the up and up and he's got a dead man switch somewhere and they're like, we're too worried about that. Even if all that is 100% true, just them allowing him out there is a form of intelligence gathering as well. So again, that goes back to my primary point. He's still traversing the earth because on some level, for some reason, he is saying something they want him to say. And people are hearing what they want what they want us to hear. The 9 lives, I think this one can be handled quickly because Texas question is going to eat up the rest. She says she has a question. Do y'all think most Bigfoot sightings are real?
Subjectively, yes.
Okay, interesting question. Dean?
I think it's a combination. I think some are clearly misidentifications and some are people having genuine experiences with some anomalous phenomenon. Doesn't mean it's a genuine flesh and blood ape that's native to the wilderness of North America like a giant bear. It could be the same way people have genuine UFO experiences or genuine figures at the end of their bed at night experiences or Blessed Virgin Mary experiences or, just add to the list of supernatural paranormal apparitions and experiences. So on that level, I think there are many that are real.
Yep. Rob, as the Bigfoot experiencer.
Of course, I believe. Do I believe all stories? Healthy skepticism has come into play, but hey, you know, I'm a knower, right? I know they exist. I was a believer.
Mhm.
I'm a knower. I've come to that side. 2018 Bigfoot encounter, and yeah, and like we talked earlier, though, a lot of the stories, a lot of them, they emulate stories that we heard 10 years ago, 20 years ago. A lot of them have the common elements. Now, if you get a story that, they saw a Sasquatch get beamed down from a flying saucer and orbs were around and Dogman was running around and all of a sudden a goat man bucked me in the ass, then yeah, I'm guessing I'm not going to, I'll have healthy
Mhm.
skepticism with that one. I look for the common elements, but yeah, I believe in all these things, and I believe they all come full circle, and they're all intertwined together for some reason, right? That's my belief, and that's
Yeah.
what I stick with.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. And I think everyone knows my position. I think, again, to Rob's point, again, healthy skepticism. Some people are misidentifying things. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we've had plenty of those. Some people are making it up. But for people who have a genuine experience, again, the question is, what do you mean by real? Because I do think there is a good opportunity that there is a flesh and blood creature out there, but I think it's a very small population. I think way more people are encountering something other, to Dean's point, right? Something that it may appear as a Bigfoot to you, it may come as a dogman to this other person, may show up as a gray, as a gray over here, or an elf or whatever. Like, we don't know.
Right.
I think it's a lot more. Again, the question is, what do you mean by real? Now, real quick, I'm sorry, Rob.
No, and I was just going to say, as I always say, even with my experience, still to this, I know it was something, but am I 100% that it was Bigfoot? I can't say 100% it was, right?
Right.
For those of you who heard my story, we're not getting into that. I still question what it was, but it was something that was not, it was not normal.
It wasn't a couple of kids throwing stones from the.
Yeah, not a couple of kids tossing rocks.
Rob, we should get you on Talking Weird because I've never chatted to you about your experience. Let's get you on sometime soon if you'd like to come on.
I'll talk some weird with you. Oh, I love talking.
Oh, he loves talking, and he loves talking weird.
Because both Jason and Donny have done Talking Weird, but you haven't. It seems unfair.
Oh my God, I'm the third fiddle now. Jeez, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I'd love to come on. Hook me up. You got we're on Facebook. Yeah,
we'll do it soon.
So this is the question I know is going to eat up the rest of the time, which is 8 minutes. I kind of expected that to happen sooner. My apologies. But Tex asks, "Hey Doc, could you give us your take on the Aurora, Texas crash in 1897?"
Well, that will take a moment. For starters, for those people who might or might not be aware, in 1896 through 1897, there was something called the Great Airship, which flew supposedly across America. And the papers of the day kind of tracked sometimes what seemed to be a course, sometimes it would seem to be erratic, but there seemed to be a phenomenon that was moving across the skies before that type of craft actually existed. It was odd. It was at the dawn of when you might have something like a dirigible like that, or a heavier than air type of machine, but it was too early for that technology to likely exist. And the papers ran all kinds of different stories. There was stories of people having encounters with the pilots or the crews who were from Europe or who from somewhere else in America, or flying to Cuba to fight the war over there at the time. There were lots of different narratives. There was another fascinating story as well, which some people say, well, this predates the cattle mutilation tale, because somebody supposedly saw somebody in the airship try to lasso a cow and lift it off the ground. And so people are saying, see, there were cattle thieves back in 1897. One of the reasons the Aurora crash, of course, has come down to us is because later, when there were things like the supposed crash at Roswell or Aztec or wherever else, when the crashes were happening in the 40s and Ford to Kecksburg, yada, 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 is that it seems to be the earliest example in America of some type of UFO crashing. And the story is this thing crashed and there was some inhuman pilot and they buried it in the graveyard, but they don't know where it was buried and they wanted to dig up the grave and yada, 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 yada. Now, I'm not dismissing Tex's point because it's a really interesting story. Do I think that there was actually some extraterrestrial craft crashed then during the Great Airship flap and they buried the pilot in their graveyard. No, and I think there's been a fair amount of material which is fairly adequately debunked. I wrote a little bit about it in my master's thesis, because before I did my PhD dissertation, I did a smaller one for my master's where I traced UFO belief back in America to 1896. I didn't do that in my PhD dissertation. I started in 1947. So I'm relatively familiar with it, but I know at the time there was something which we still have today. Now we just call it fake news. Back then they called it yellow journalism. So people seem to almost be competing to invent wonderful stories about what the airship was doing when it came to their town. So it sits within, that's why I brought up the other stories. It sits within this broad tableau of the time of looking at these stories local papers were writing, which some of them suggested these things were extraterrestrial. Some suggested they were European. Some suggested they were Americans, whatever. There was a big diverse range of different stories about the airship and interactions with the crew and everything else. Something seemed to have happened then to trigger this, but a lot of it could have been a social hysteria as well, driven by the newspapers of the time that were running these incredible stories. And so did something crash in Aurora? I don't think so.
Those newspapers back then got pretty silly too.
Yeah.
If you go back into the history of like some of the, I guess, their version of clickbait.
Yeah,
it was
that's what all this was. That's
bad,
exactly what this was. Yeah.
Yep. That's a very valid. That is a valid point. I think that, again, one of those things where the truth could be a little somewhere in between.
Who knows? Maybe
Right.
something did crash in. I think the reason that story, when research, including myself, back in the 90s when I was looking at this, I went through reams of old microfiche. This is before we had stuff on the internet, looking for airship stories. Because Sydney University had a fairly good collection of American newspapers. And I think they had the Chicago Tribune going back then. They had some other ones from around the country going back then. So I would go through looking for these stories. But a lot of people had done it obviously before me also, obviously. So when they saw one which talked about a crash or a cow napping, it rang truer to the current UFO narrative than one that said the inventor was from Germany and was testing, whatever, or one that said, we're off to fight the Cubans, boys. You know what I mean? Like, it's just those ones which were weirder and fit the current narrative were culled out and included in the UFO periodicals, while the ones which didn't fit the narrative were just kind of ignored. But there was a lot of stories, and many of them very strange.
That's a great point, and I think ultimately ties into some of the things we've talked about on this channel a lot, which is narratives being controlled. And ultimately, that's the conversation we're having right now about Bob Lazar. It's a controlled narrative. Regardless of what you think about him, the simple fact of the matter is him and other whistleblowers, whether you think they're being honest, you think they're manipulated, you think they're part of the military-industrial complex as a disinformation on it, however you want to come to it, the simple fact of the matter is the fact that they're even allowed to speak is all part of this broader narrative manipulation by those in power. And Dean, thank you for coming on. It's been a great conversation.
Absolutely, man.
That's definitely a great point.
I love chatting with you guys.
This
so much fun.
Show.
Real quickly, sorry, before I allow Rob to do his thing here. Jared Crazy Indian says, "Hey Jason, please don't laugh when you read this. Not even a smile, please." I don't know what you mean. I am smiling.
I don't either. I just think it's kind of funny, I guess, in a strange, weird way.
Interesting. That was my smiling face. All right. Again, thank you, Dean. Thank you, Donnie. Rob, do us the honors.
Yes, absolutely. First, before I end the show, thank you to Be Kind, to Jared, to Scott, to Tex, to Truth Defender, to Titan, to Anella, and Derek for your awesome super chats. Don't forget, you can find us on Texas Front Porch, Bigfoot Mission Rob, and of course, now we've got Jason McLean Questions Everything joining our illustrious group. Mondays is Texas Front Porch at Monday at 9 in the East. Tuesday, Van Buren Variety, 8 o'clock in the East. Beyond BMR, that'd be me, 9 in the East. And then, of course, the Doctor and Jason, Mysterious Library on Untold Radio AM. You can find them on Doug's channel, Doug Hijacks at 10 in the East. Wednesdays, right back with Jason McLean Questions Everything at 9 in the East. Thursdays, tomorrow, Brunch with Bigfoot Michigan. Rob is on at 1 in the East. And Mike Bueller is my guest tomorrow. I got to put out the plug, 1 in the afternoon tomorrow. Bigfoot encounter, very similar to mine. I talked to this guy ad nauseum, and a lot of Well, a lot of eerie similarities in our story. So he will be my guest tomorrow, Thursday night after me at 9 at night. The Blondes, the Booze, the Paranormal Podcast. Check them out. If you need more booze, you need some woo with the boo. Friday, 9 o'clock. About the Blondes, the Booze, the Paranormal Podcast. Saturday, Tex. He's got that new show with Danielle Diva. He's dropped four shows: True Crime, Infamous Minds. Check him out. 3 in the East. And of course, we got my friend Jessica Jones, Space Star Radio, and Miss Diva on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, 10 and 11, respectively, in the East. Go check them out. Show them some love. Show some love to Texas Front Porch, Jason McLean. The good old Donny Show, whenever he gets his act together, we'll be promoting him as well.
It's coming.
Good old BMR and Dr. Dean. Go check him out again on Mysterious Library and that Weird Talk or whatever it is, which I guess I'll be a guest on here in another couple of weeks. Awesome.
Yeah. We'll have you on soon. Looking forward to it.
Very good.
Yeah.
And again, don't forget, Jason McQueen Questions Everything is now a YouTube channel as well. We're going to be doing some pre-recorded first little things going to drop this weekend. So follow link below, like, follow, subscribe, so you can hear some of the other things that we're going to be talking about. A lot of really cool and diverse conversations about to happen. And real quick, hey, for Mental, it's been a while, man. Missed you. On that note, again, love every single one of y'all. We will catch y'all next week. We're going to talk about super soldiers. We're going to have Randy on.
Ooh,
the
good super
infamous
soul. Awesome.
Randy.
Hey, is the firmamentalist a flat earther?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Oh, that's going to start a fight. Anyway,
Don't forget, folks,
No, it's your-
unicorns are not real. They're not real. Definitely. Stop at unicorns. No unicorn talks.
no unicorn talks. All right, we'll see y'all next week, everyone.
See you later.
Bye.
Love you all. Thank you.